Hello, hello. Just quick check. Can you hear me? See my slides? We're good? Excellent. Good morning or good afternoon, kind of depending on where you are. I'm Kate Saylor, an informationist from the Taubman Health Sciences Library at University of Michigan. And I'm going to talk about some strategies to help you say yes to saying no. This presentation is an abbreviated version of a part of our systematic review workshop. And so we introduced this segment a few years ago, and I love this segment. It always turns into like a really interesting and engaging conversation. There's a lot of, venting and supporting one another because we all struggle with a lot of these pain points. And it's just great to kind of hear people's tips and tricks. So I will be covering some of that. So today we're going to be talking about some issues related to accepting or declining requests. We'll also talk about some considerations that can impact your ability to work on projects, and we'll discuss some strategies for saying no to projects when it is the appropriate option. All right, let me move this over. I realize I just closed my chat, so there we go. So we heard, oh my gosh, I love the cases in the previous session. I'm like, you guys are in my computer and you're in my consultations. So we heard about a lot of scenarios or situations where maybe you need to say no or back out, but some other things to kind of think about. Like for my personal experience, most of the cases where I need to say no are due to time. Like I might be working on a bunch of other searches, or it might be a really instruction heavy time of the year. I might just not have the time or capacity to work on this new particular project. Another scenario that can come up is you might not have the expertise. So perhaps the team reaches out and they want like big, broad methodological guidance. And maybe this is your first project and you're really only comfortable with working on the search, right? So maybe you need to just say no to part of the project. Referring might not be an option. We know everybody's busy. Your colleagues are just as busy as you, dealing with a lot of the same requests. And so sometimes it's just not possible to reach out and get someone else to help. So you might need to say no. We've all run into situations where the project requests come in and there's maybe a lot of problems. There's an issue, the question's not well defined, there's no protocol, it's an unreasonable timeline. You probably should be saying no to those projects. And then if you've been doing this long enough, and just like the scenarios we just talked about, you've probably been in a situation where you agreed to work on a project, you said yes very early on, and as the project progresses, you see that like rigorous methodology start to unravel. And so you might need to say no to a project that you originally said yes to. So saying no, it's difficult, right? It's hard, and it can be hard for a lot of reasons. I find a lot of librarians are called to this profession because they want to help. We are very service-minded people, and you may directly or indirectly feel a lot of pressure to help somebody when they ask for it. Sometimes the way people ask or like just assume that you're going to take on a project can make it really hard to say no. It could be that you're working with a team that you have a long-standing relationship with them. You've worked on a lot of projects. They're fantastic to work with. You love them. They love you, and you don't want to disappoint them, but maybe you just don't have the time to take it on. The next 2 points are a little tricky, right? Like you could be the evidence synthesis librarian at your institution, or evidence synthesis work could be a very specific point under your job description. In either case, I still think you should have the power or ability to say no or not now to projects. And then something that might be a little bit more invisible that makes it difficult to say no will be power dynamics. And so there's a whole variety of dynamics at play beyond just like your job position within an organization, or things like seniority. Um, you also need to think about like power and privilege. So it could be you, or it could be people that you work with, could be part of a minoritized or marginalized population. And you might not have the power, or they might not have the power to say no, or they might not feel safe to say no. So it can be a little bit more complicated than just saying, oh, I don't have time to work on this project, or too much on my plate. So there's a lot of factors that come into play in your ability to say no to projects. So I love time management and productivity things. I love all the books and the blogs and the podcasts. But I also love meditation and mindfulness. And so these are like two kind of polar opposite things. But what I found in this book, which I love this book, highly recommend, is that this actually provides a good intersection between those two things. And like I started reading it and I'm like, oh man, a lot of this stuff actually really applies to like the kind of complex work that we do in evidence synthesis projects. And so for the full systematic review workshop that we do. This session is actually a whole hour long. And so we kind of like made some cuts here. So normally I kind of dig into this book and do some kind of looking at the content of each chapter and aligning it with our work. But what I want to mention for this session is this thought. I do think you should also check out the book because it's really, really good. But the main premise of this book is that you're going to die. We're all going to die. And on average, we only have about 4,000 weeks on Earth, and there is no way that you can do it all, right? Check out the book. It's really, really good. That's all I'm going to say about it. Um, and so one of our past co-instructors actually found this book, and then it made the rounds through a lot of us at the office. And so it's actually a really interesting and powerful technique for you to kind of determine what is the most important thing and how do you build your life or your work around eliminating things that are maybe less important to hopefully maximize your effort and impact. And so these are just a few highlights from the book that we found to be most relevant to evidence synthesis work. So the first one is to separate the decision, the no decision or the yes decision, from the relationship with the asker. Just because you can't take on a project right now doesn't mean you're disrespecting or harming that person or that relationship. This is when you just kind of need to change internally, kind of change your perspective to maybe make it a little bit more comfortable to say no. Saying no, just no, can be really intimidating. And there's a lot of other ways to get at the result without actually using the word no. And we'll talk about those in a minute. The third one was really important to me because I've absolutely hit points in my work life where I'm struggling. Like, I just can't get my instruction stuff updated. I can't get that research guide updated. And I'm like, what's going on? It's because I was working on too many searches at one time. So it's important to think about that trade off. So when you're saying yes to projects, you are also saying no to projects, right? And so really think about that when you're trying to balance kind of all of the projects and service and things that you guys do. You also just need to make peace with the fact that sometimes when you say no, it requires trading a little bit of popularity for respect, right? Like, I've absolutely worked with teams that just kind of assume I spend my whole day sitting at the reference desk, just hoping and praying that I'll get a project to come in. And then they are shocked, appalled when they're like, can you get that search done in 2 days? And I'm like, I can't even look at that for like 2 weeks, right? And it's like, oh, it's so jarring for them. They get a little frustrated with me, but I think it kind of shifts the balance a little bit and they respect my time a little bit more, knowing that their project isn't the only thing that goes on in my work life, right? So it's a little pain for them, but I think it's better in the long run. And then over the next few slides, we'll talk about all the different ways you can say no. But it's important to also consider that sometimes just saying that no clearly, concisely early on in the project might be the most graceful way to get out of the project. It gives the team time to maybe pursue other options. All right, so now to the fun part, getting into all the different ways you can possibly say no. So these are just a handful of suggestions from some of the books I just mentioned and then some of our personal experiences. So the first is the soft no. So this might be a helpful way if the team is making a lot of high pressure demands, especially on your time, like they need a search and they need it next week. So this one is actually more of a yes, but with boundaries. So, no, I can't get that search to you by Friday, but I can maybe next week or maybe next month. So it's kind of a no, but um, if you're confronted or asked in a way that makes it difficult for you to like flat out say no, like, if you're face to face or you're in a group setting and it's just very awkward and you kind of maybe the power dynamics come into play, consider ways to kind of buy yourself a little bit of time. Like maybe, I'm going to have to check in with my team, or you know what, let me go check my calendar and I'll get back to you. Gives you just a little bit of a buffer to kind of think about your current workload and maybe shift some things around before fully committing to their project. Um, Declining a project in person or over email kind of places a heavy burden on you as the individual. And so, one way to kind of alleviate some of that weight is to remove your face or your name from the response. So, perhaps you want to consider using a general evidence synthesis request email, so no names involved, and then maybe even turning on an auto reply that tells the submitter that your service is at capacity and will not be reviewing requests for a few months. Whatever, you aren't the one saying no. It's the general service or the institution that's declining or delaying their project. So that might be a helpful kind of loophole for you. The next one's my favorite because it is so simple and it's so effective. And so it's really like, I'm fully committed, or I'm not resourced to take on any more projects. And so this is nice because it still respects their project. Their project is great. It's a high priority, but it kind of shifts the blame to how your institution is staffed or kind of all the other demands that are, pulling your time away from their project. So that's kind of a respectful way to say no. I find the prioritization response to be really effective when you get a request that comes in from someone like your supervisor, someone that might have control over your, what you do or how you spend your time. And they're probably also familiar with maybe some of your other commitments. So, like, yes, supervisor, I will take on this request that came in that you're telling me about, but what else can I deprioritize to kind of give yourself a little bit of room to actually work on this project? Um, the next one, it kind of depends on who you are and your relationship with the team or kind of what the request is. Like, can you say it with a little bit of humor? I don't know if I can pull this off. I'm a little bit serious with my researchers, but I absolutely work with people that are very charming and witty and could pull this off really well. Um, and so instead of saying a flat out no, perhaps you can negotiate an alternative. Like maybe you can't take on that full project and they're on a tight deadline. You can't refer it out, whatever. Maybe you can give them part of it. Perhaps I can, craft your initial PubMed search and then you can work on translation elsewhere. So perhaps there's some type of compromise you could make. And then finally, there's referral. This one's challenging because I know like we're all busy. My colleagues are all just as busy as I am. So maybe someone just has a little more immediate availability, or you could even refer out to an external group like the Association of Independent Information Professionals. So referral, it might be an option. But dun dun dun, what if you already said yes? We talked a little bit about that in the earlier presentation, some kind of nightmare scenarios. So like, I already said yes, but now I kind of need to say no. Um, this is real. This is true. This is honest. When I was a little kid and I would complain about anything, my mom would say, "There's only two things in life, Kate, joy and learning. This is learning." Um, if you find yourself kind of in this bad spot, take a beat and try to figure out like, why did I get here and what can I do to prevent this scenario from ever happening again? It could be a you problem. It could be something that you're doing or failing at. It could be a problem with the project. It could be a problem with the team. But take a beat, ask some whys until you can get to a solution. Maybe it's not you. Maybe it's the library needs to hire somebody else, or maybe you need some collaboration criteria. So it might not be a you problem, but it might be helpful to kind of do a little root cause analysis to prevent that thing from happening again. I know we talked about this in the previous presentation also, but that essentialism book talks about, there's a whole chapter on how to uncommit. So like once you've said yes, maybe you need to say no and kind of back out and cut your losses. And so this book again frames it as non-essentialist and essentialist thinking. The non-essentialist really gets kind of stuck in that sunk cost fallacy, right? Like I've already invested so much time in here. How do I get out? I can't. I just need to power through. Again, sometimes you can't say no, but the essentialist, maybe it's worthwhile to cut it. So it could be something like, withdrawing authorship. And this is my last slide, so I'll just kind of zoom through this one very quickly. So we are getting ready. I looked at the program. It looks awesome. We're getting ready to hear all sorts of presentations on, tools and techniques and strategies so we can say yes, 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 and do more and do more and do more. But I think it's very, very important to consider how are you going to say no, especially if you're new to this work or this is something new that your library is taking on. Take a beat and think about, are you going to say yes to every project? I don't think that's actually possible and I don't recommend it. How are you or how is your library going to determine which projects to take on? It might be helpful to just outline some personal criteria or kind of work with colleagues to develop a policy about the types of projects. Like you have to have a protocol. Maybe there's just a threshold that these projects have to meet before you work on them. Be honest, think about your workload. How much can you actually take on? Um, how are you going to communicate your role, the types of things you're going to do, the things you're not going to do, and expected timelines? Um, if you do say yes, make sure you're getting credit for your work. What will you do if you're overcommitted? This is a big one. Like, what strategies will you use? How will you handle yourself? How will you handle the work that is not getting done? Because it's going to happen. You'll hit a point where you just have too much on your plate. What can you maybe let go? This is important to think about. Think about it now before you get to that point. Like, what's the release valve? What's your exit strategy? And then about ways that you're going to say no. Do you feel empowered to turn down projects? Maybe you'll set up that faceless email. And so just make sure you have some of these scripts handy and be thoughtful and mindful about the work that you do take on. Thank you.